Hey John, how are you today?
Good, Marie. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm hanging in there. I'm excited to be talking with you today about beer law and a bunch of other
Very low
things.
expectations.
Yeah.
A very low bar of entertainment. But I'm excited to be here. I'm thrilled whenever anybody actually wants to listen to what I have to say.
Yes, I think I've seen quite a few different subjects, and we were just chatting about a few before we hopped on here. But I think it's going to be very interesting to get your thoughts on some developments that are happening in the beer law industry and maybe on a few other subjects. Before we dive into that, I'd love to just share with those watching. I met you in my last year of law school. I believe I came to you because I was doing like a capstone project on technology and like professional standards, and you were super helpful with that, and also super helpful when it was time for me to look for a job. So thank you for that. And this is a plug to any law students who might be watching to always network and just get to know people. And that is how we met. And then fast forward a year, I am now doing some interviews on my YouTube channel. And I immediately thought of you because you work in a very unique area of the law. And so I'll kind of let you just introduce yourself, what you do, and what your day to day looks like.
Yeah, you say unique. Some people say bizarre. So, for the listeners out there in the interwebs world, again, my name is John Szymankiewicz. I'm with Beer Law Center, and I'm an alcohol attorney. And I hear that admitting it is the first step. I'm still working on that. But yeah, so I refer to myself as an alcohol attorney, which basically means for me that I am a business generalist, a lot of business law stuff with an alcohol overlay. So all or nearly all of my clients are breweries, wineries, distilleries, or alcohol retailers. And so I help folks with everything from startup and formation, licensing, trademarks, federal and state compliance, even then like buying and selling. We've been working with people that are either trying to sell their brewery or buying a brewery or winery or distillery, and kind of working through that, because the bottom line there is you've got sort of everything, not everything, a lot of things that are very similar broadly in business across the world, or across the legal world, if you will. And then you throw alcohol on top of it, and alcohol is basically a pretty highly regulated product. It's like if you're trying to buy or build or start a pharmacy, the taxing and advertising and what you can say and how you can say it is all very regulated. We don't often see that or think about that because alcohol is so prevalent in our society. But when you kind of dive into it, and it varies state to state. There's some pretty restrictive stuff on what you can do, how you can do it, and even who can own a brewery or winery or something like that. So that's kind of what we do. I've been doing exclusively alcohol law for a little over 10 years now. I started with arbitrarily declaring myself an expert about 15 years ago, and I've been a home brewer for almost 30 years now.
Nice.
And so I come to the law as career 2.0. I went to law school at night while working as an engineer in the pharmaceutical industry. Because I tell people I was an engineer for about 10 or 15 years, and it took me about 10 years to realize I didn't like engineering. So went to law school at night and decided I wanted to do something I actually enjoyed doing. So after law school, hung out a shingle and have been slowly approaching the status of professional drinker ever since.
Nice. I love that. And when you were kind of laying out the lay of the land, if you will, of beer law, it reminds me a lot of how I've heard art lawyers kind of describe art law, because a lot of people think it's like a very specific body of law, when in reality, it can be business, it can be IP, it can maybe even be real estate or mergers. And then, of course, you do have like some very specific niche laws that apply. And so I'd love to hear how over the years you've kind of grown your practice. And when it comes to meeting a client, are you usually meeting them at the like infancy of their idea, or is it kind of a mix of both? You meet people who are just starting out, or people who have been doing it, but they, need help for something specific?
Sure. Well, I'll start with saying there was no alcohol law class in law school. There isn't one. I think there's one guy in Texas teaching an alcohol class like every 2 years or something like that. We follow each other on X.
Nice.
But there's no like class on this. And
Yeah.
there's no like training program for this. It's one of those like, okay, you can go to a CLE and listen to some doofus like me talk for an hour or 2 hours, and then you still got to go figure out how to do it on your own because every state is different, or each client is a little different. So it's a lot of trial and error. And so I say that all to say experience is hard won in this area. But I enjoy it because I enjoy working with paper, and not so much people, but with paper and rules and so forth. And I say that to say I am not a litigator. I do alcohol law. I don't do, disputes. I don't do franchise agreement lawsuits or something like that. I am purely on the transactional and business side, trying to keep people from going to court. And in terms of how I meet clients, the statement I always go to is, if you want to meet clients, you have to go to where they are. With the alcohol industry, particularly breweries, but to a lesser extent wineries and distilleries, I won't say they're insular, but they have a built-in distrust of outsiders, and particularly lawyers. A lot of these folks started this with sort of a bootstrap mentality. I have rough and rugged individualism. I can do it myself. I don't need you. I'm going to fight the man. And it's true. I mean, a lot of what they can do or what you can do, you don't need a lawyer for. The position I take is, yeah, you can do what I do, but it's going to take you longer. You're more likely to make mistakes. And by the way, it's not a good use of your time, especially if you're starting up a distillery or winery or something. You could hire a knuckle-dragging moron like me to do your licensing and your legal work and all that sort of stuff. The most important thing you can do as an owner is be out there telling your story.
Right.
Marketing and getting the product out there and getting people excited about that, because that's really hard to do. It's harder to hire those folks than it is to hire a CPA to do your books. So that's the position I typically try and take with folks and go, yeah, what I do is not rocket surgery. The value I bring is I do a lot of it. So, all the folks at the North Carolina ABC, we're on a first name basis with almost everybody over there that works in permitting, because we do 2 or 3 permits a week. So the TTB, I'm on a first name basis with about half of the processors there because we worked with them for the last 4 or 5 years. So it's not necessarily about, is this right or is that wrong? It's no, this is what they're looking for. How can we put it in a format that makes it easy for them to say yes? That's what we're really good at. Or, well, the regulation says this. I said, yeah, but what's not written there is the ABC interprets it like that to mean this. So, well, how'd you find that out? Because I did it wrong like 3 times before I found that out. Those sort of things where we can build some value. But I say all of that to say is you have to go to where they are. Starting out, for years, I was at like every bottle release, every beer festival, every industry event I could go to. And my pitch was always the same. Hey, I'm a lawyer. I do this stuff. No pressure. If you have any questions, give me a call. Here's my card. That low contact, low pressure, low key marketing. It seems to work with that crowd. You asked, when do I find folks? Well, I now I get a pretty broad mix. For a few years, all I got was startups, right? And, after 5 or 6 years of doing this, I started getting some, oh no, this is second tier growth, or existing folks that are unhappy with their previous lawyer or didn't have a lawyer previously and now need some help. I really like working with folks as early in the process as I can, because there's a lot to do up front that if you don't understand, it's going to cause real problems later. And I tell people it's a lot easier to clean up the poo before it goes through the fan rather than afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the things I did a couple of years ago was wrote a book called Beer Law.
Nice.
One now for distilleries, because my personal bias and belief on this is when I'm talking with clients or even potential clients, I don't believe that you build value by hoarding information. I don't charge for an initial consult. I'll tell you what I know. 90% of what's in my book is on the blog, is on my blog on the website. You'll look it up for yourself for free. The goal there is, trust me, I know I do this. I know what I'm talking about. If you're confused, let me help. In North Carolina, there are about, I think, 430 breweries right now. In the last 15 years, I've represented about 200 of them.
Wow.
Or another. And the folks that I don't represent, I have probably talked to multiple times because I'm at events and they see my booth, or I bought them a beer at a sponsorship or a conference or something like that. Because again, I've got a lot of people I consider friends that are not clients, but are in the industry that, it's about being there and being around, being committed to the industry. That goes a long way with building trust with my crowd anyway.
Yeah. And As I'm listening to you, it sounds like the lesson here is twofold because, you've started this, so I view you as an entrepreneur. So on the one hand, you're sharing lessons on like what's worked for you and like growing the Beer Law Center, and then on the other hand, working with other entrepreneurs who just happen to work, with distilleries or work in distilleries and breweries, the benefit of being able to delegate to an attorney versus trying to do everything yourself, which has been a big lesson I've been learning as like a first year associate, is trying to, clients will often say, well, I can do this, or we can just kind of bootstrap it. And it's like, you can, but that's why you met us in the first place, because there was an issue that happened and now you need to clean it up. And so I think those are some very good lessons that you're hitting home.
The other things I really think about for somebody like yourself as a first year associate or something like that, it's also about building that experience to say, okay, so you're asking this, can we bootstrap this, or this is the trademark I want to look at? Well, okay, my experience says if you're doing this, you're probably thinking about this other thing or this thing after that. We need to talk about those now, because if we wait till then, it's going to be a lot more difficult. Right.
Yeah.
Because I know you're seeing some of this, especially with the trademark stuff. They're like, oh, I want a trademark for this. Okay, so you want to do t-shirts? Yes. Are you going to do shoes? Well, maybe. Are you going to be a lifestyle brand? Yes. All right, time out. Do that, because that's different than just I'm making.
Exactly.
So that's the other bit, that you've got some real ammunition around to go, here's how I can build value, because I'm thinking about things that you haven't thought about yet.
Yeah. So staying, kind of 2 steps ahead for the client, because you're kind of taking that mental work out of the way for them. So yeah, that's like a really great value add. And I think like something that goes in line with being 2 steps ahead when it comes to, we were just chatting about this before, changes in the economy, changes in the law. I saw a few headlines where potential changes could be coming to North Carolina regarding some alcohol laws. And then you and I were chatting about how the economy is affecting breweries and distilleries right now. So I'd love to just get your thoughts and projections on where we're headed and things that you'll be watching over the next year or so.
Well, I'll tell you, if you want to find a group of depressed individuals, go to a brewers conference before happy hour, because right now the alcohol industry generally is, I'll say, suffering. It's going through some really painful times. There's a lot of question because tariffs are up in the air and a lot of equipment comes from overseas, particularly for wine and spirits. Export and import is a huge issue. We don't know where tariffs are going to land on that. Right now, interest rates are awfully high. They're higher than we've had them in the last, 10 or so years. That makes it very difficult to access capital. Even if you can access it, can you service the debt long term? And that makes it hard to get people to invest, to start new things, property values. And as a result, rental, trying to rent a place is incredibly expensive. I know of multiple clients who are either closing or moving because they rented a place 10 years ago on a 10-year lease, and now their lease is up. They're ready to renew again or renegotiate, and the landlord's increasing the rent by 100%. They've regentrified the area, or now it's a much more hip and fun area. Well, now I can't afford to be there anymore.
Yeah.
So right now, there's a lot of pressure on the industry. But I will say some of that I think is healthy, because sort of leading up to COVID, and certainly during COVID, money was just so easy to get. I think a lot of folks built a business with a build it and they will come mindset. I talk to potential clients and I'm like, okay, so what's your brewery going to do different? What's going to distinguish you from all those other breweries out there? And he said, well, we're going to make high quality beer locally. I go, what the hell do you think everybody else is doing? 1,000 other breweries in the United States trying to do that. People ask me, are we saturated? I don't think we're saturated, because there are still deserts or no man's lands of alcohol spaces. But we are at a point where the folks who either don't know how to run a business or aren't making good product, they're starting to get culled out of the herd, because moving forward, you got to make either good or preferably a great product, and you need to know how to run a business. Previously, our economic pressures weren't such that it really forced that issue. Now we're into that kind of cycle, and I tell clients right now, it's cheaper to buy a distillery or a winery than it is to build one. That's an easier entry than it used to be. In terms of what's coming, I think, well, the hot topic for the last probably year now has been THC. And THC is it's an interesting molecule. My little engineering brain geeking out a little bit. It's an interesting thing, but from a legal perspective, it is super interesting and bizarre because it's the same plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's below 0.3% delta 9 THC by dry weight, it's hemp. If it's over that, it's cannabis. And this one is totally illegal. That one's totally legal, but we can regulate it. So it gets to be really interesting. And I don't represent, for example, any growers right now, although we're getting a lot more into the THC space. But, one of the concerns, as I understand it from the growers, is if your product, the USDA comes out and tests your product, they take a statistical sample, and if it's 0.4 instead of 0.3% by dry weight, they flame the whole crop. You lose everything.
Wow.
That's huge. That's like, some of my corn, the yield wasn't as good as it should have been. No, you've lost your entire crop. So
Wow.
I digress. Beverages, because I'm getting lots and lots of questions about that. Right now, especially in North Carolina, it is the wild, wild west. We have no laws about THC. And people are like, cool, that's great, right? And the answer is not really. One of the major issues there is we don't even have an age gate. A 10-year-old can go into a convenience store and buy a THC beverage. They can buy a 6-pack. They can buy a case, which is enough to totally make anyone high, let alone potentially OD, depending on your body weight, right?
Yep.
So we need something in place. And there's lots of competing different approaches to how to regulate it. Texas was looking at a complete ban, and the governor vetoed that. Virginia has a great framework, but then they put in a couple laws that really make it restrictive, and it kind of killed the edible industry there. North Carolina had some truly bizarre ways to address it. But at one point, this current legislative session that just, I think, adjourned in July, we had 5 different competing bills to regulate THC in North Carolina. Looking around the map, states are doing it differently, and it's getting to be a patchwork. And it's really weird. We have something like that. Alcohol regulation. Federal, it's this, and then a lot of, 50 different ways to do it. So we know kind of how that works. We're just waiting to see how states sort things out to be able to work things together. And obviously it'd be nicer if we had a uniform system.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're going to be seeing more regulation, hopefully intelligent regulation of the product coming out. And I'm still hoping for at some point, legalization across the board for cannabis.
I'm going to rewind a bit because I have 2 follow-up questions. So when you were talking about breweries and breweries that are facing a difficult time right now, the follow-up question I had was, it kind of sounds like maybe they had a proof of concept issue. Like they didn't, like it's not enough to just say, I'm going to make high quality beer. Like, do you think that kind of overlaps? Like had they really differentiated themselves in the beginning and came up with a business model that could be more sustainable? And if yes to that, like how would you advise them to do that? Do you have advice to someone who's trying to create a product that's different, that can withstand contractions in the economy?
Sure. So one of the things, and it's one of the few things in my mind that was good that came out of COVID, was it taught us as an industry that we have to diversify income streams. Because, pre-COVID, the conventional wisdom was if you're a brewery or a winery or a distillery with an on-site tasting room, that's where all your margins are, right? Because you're producing a product and you are the wholesaler and you're the retailer and you're capturing all those margins to the consumer so that perhaps that can of beer or beer that you're going to charge $5 a pint for only cost you, $1 to produce. And so you capture that $4 margin instead of, well, $1 of that goes to the wholesaler and $3 of that goes to the retailer. You could capture all of that. So the conventional wisdom was you'll make your money in the tap room. Well, until tap room shut down. Oh, crap. Where, if we don't have any distribution, I have no other way of selling my product. A lot of people had to pivot very quickly to go, okay, we were only doing on draft product for our location, or we had never worked hard on selling our wine away from our tasting room. We only sold it through here. Now we've got to go actually try and sell it to somebody else or can our product or, get out there and just, in the distribution, which is more visible, but the profit margins are lower. So you've got to sell a lot more to make the same amount of money, but that also costs you more. So what it taught us was, gosh, we better have multiple ways to make money. It's not just I run a brewery with a tap room or a winery with a tasting room. It's I've got a winery with a tasting room and I've got product and distribution. And by the way, I'm running a venue because I've got a little amphitheater outside my winery or tasting room, or I've got another room and I'm running an event venue in there as well. And we're doing corporate events and having people rent out the whole place. And we've got multiple streams of trying to work with folks. That's a huge issue, is because again, that takes out some of the seasonality, thinking more about what's out there that I need to be worried about that I'm not currently terrified about. And I tell people this, if there's going to be something on my tombstone, I really like the statement. It's, you don't go into this kind of business without having faith that things are going to work out. But if you're not absolutely terrified, then you don't understand the situation, right? And there's you have to have a healthy amount of fear in some of this and be looking for, well, okay, what's next? What do I have to guard against next? Gosh, things are going great. Good. What happens if my sales manager gets hit by a bus? Am I dependent on that person, for our future of the company? Okay, what are the systems I need to be putting in place? What happens if I was talking to somebody today, they're buying a brewery here locally, and in the contract, I put in this risk of loss provision. And he said, what is that? I said, well, it's to cover you between when you sign the contract and when you close on the business and buy it. What if the business, we had Hurricane Chantal not long ago, and businesses in Chapel Hill flooded. What happens if the brewery floods between these two? Now, if we don't have like a clause here to let you get out, you're still stuck buying the damn thing.
Yeah.
Even though somebody else is going to get a good insurance check, right? So it's kind of like getting people to think about the what ifs and, what are things that I'm not thinking about that I should be thinking about. What I would say to folks is that you want to look at your business plan really hard. Take your most likely case and then cut it by like 20, 30 or 50% and say, can I still survive? Can I still service the debt if I have 3 or 4 or 6 or more bad months?
Yeah.
Because that can happen. And really pressure test what you're doing, not just blind faith, this is going to be great. People with business acumen and a business background, not just, hey, I've got a great idea for a product and I'm passionate about it.
I know we're getting close on time, but I have one more question for you, and then our final question. And this one's a follow-up, because when we were talking about the cannabis industry growing, being like the wild, wild west, specifically when you mentioned like age restrictions, are you on TikTok at all by any chance?
I have an account and I am sent things. I have not actually ticked or talked.
Okay. Well, there has been on a certain side of TikTok, I've seen like some viral discussion about a new beverage that's come out where I think it's called Feel Free. And it basically, like, I'm not quite sure what the ingredients are in it, but it's like an herbal supplement. And it apparently has the same effect as like opiates. How quickly do you think age restrictions will be implemented? Because my understanding is the law is always slow to catch up with industries unless something horrible happens, in which case it hurries up. But I would love your thoughts on any of that.
Well, even in the case where it hurries up, it often results in bad decisions.
Yeah.
So, okay, something bad happened. We're going to make it all illegal. That's maybe overly restrictive.
Yeah.
Punishing businesses and people that weren't doing anything wrong and were using responsibly and weren't doing anything unhealthy or creating a risk. We're punishing them too because of this risk. So you're absolutely right in that the law is always going to be behind technology. The problem we've got now is that technology is moving so fast. They can't even keep the list updated of the different variants of cannabis is a great example, or THC, where you've got different chiralities, different isomers. Is it synthetic? Is it naturally derived? Is it Delta 8, Delta 10, Delta X, Delta, all these different versions that, quite frankly, 20 years ago, we couldn't even synthesize in a laboratory. We can make them on an industrial scale. So, and again, this comes back to, at some level, is legalization the answer? Legalization with regulation, right? Because if we're trying to pass laws fast enough to make things illegal, it's getting really hard and we're getting further and further behind. And then you end up with things that are really nonsensical. My favorite example of that is, so smokable hemp is legal, right? Mm-hmm. hemp that you smoke that's less than 0.3% THC, Delta 9 THC by dry weight. And it is visually, tactilely, odor, it is indistinguishable from cannabis without putting it through a mass spectrometer or something like that. So what that means is I can have a product that is completely legal, smokable hemp, walking down the street, and the current law in North Carolina is if it smells like weed, I can be arrested, or I can at least be stopped and potentially be arrested because that's enough of a reason. Well, but
Yeah.
that's literally the opposite of reasonable doubt. Right?
Yeah.
There is a doubt that what I was doing was wrong, let alone suspicion or whatever. So we end up with things like that because we don't know how else to police it.
Yeah.
So do I think regulation is coming for the THC products? Hell yes. And I think we're going to see mass adoption in the next year. States that haven't already adopted it are under a tremendous amount of pressure to do it. That doesn't address things like this other stuff that's may not even be a THC derivative. It may not have any THC in it. What is that? How do we regulate that? How do we decide whether it is or isn't? And it reminds me, 2 examples I'll give you from North Carolina in the last 10 years was powdered alcohol. I don't know if anybody remembers that garbage. It was basically dehydrated anhydrous alcohol. You added water to it and it turns into vodka. The limitation was that it was not a beverage, and ABC is the Alcohol Beverage Commission. It wasn't a beverage. They couldn't regulate it. And so it was freely available. Now, on different grounds, they just said, this is too dangerous. This is too easy to overdose. It's too easy to get. We're just going to not allow it. And then this is about 5 years ago, I worked with a company that made malt and wine derived Jello shots, pre-mixed Jello shots. It didn't taste great, but they got the job done. But again, it wasn't a beverage. It couldn't be regulated by ABC. They had to change the definition of what the jurisdiction of ABC was to include this. So those 2 were, I think, good examples of we found this, and within like 6 months, we could get something that at least kind of made sense to deal with. But right now with the THC stuff, there's so much industry pressure behind this too. We're talking a billions and billions dollar industry, nationally, that it makes it really, really hard to go, we can do this, but not that. How do we do this differently than that? How do we protect people? How do we protect the public and make sure that this thing that they're getting is actually what they're supposed to be getting? How do we, look at, because another example is the THCA, right? This is a THC precursor that you apply heat to and it converts. You could get something that says, oh yeah, this bag of flour is less than 0.3% THC, Delta 9 THC by dry weight, but it's got like 19% THCA. That's when it left the factory. If you put it in a hot car in the summer for a couple of days, does it have enough heat to convert some of that to be above 0.3%? That individual who thought they had a legal product is actually possessing an illegal product, and they can go to prison for that. So there's so much out there. I mean, it's fun and interesting from a legal perspective.
Right.
It's a challenge for businesses to navigate now and for the future.
Yeah. Well, and that's the perfect segue to my last question, which I'm going to make a standard question. In a world obsessed with disruption, so like everyone wants to be the next disruptor, the next person at the lead of the pack when like a new invention or maybe a new beverage comes along. So in a world obsessed with disruption, what do you think is worth preserving? And you can be as philosophical as you'd like with this question.
I'll tell you one of my personal struggles, and I'll cage it in that we should preserve disruption, but in a different way. Specifically, we need to work really, really hard on being able to disconnect and being able not to be interrupted and not to have, our time dragged, called on at a moment's notice, or to have some distance, to have time to not be enthralled with something else. And I say that we're talking on a video conference that I had no idea how to use before COVID.
Yeah.
Now I barely see any of my clients face to face because it's all video conference and so forth. And that's great. The technology is wonderful. I love my cell phone. I love being able to answer emails, tweet, or post and talk and engage. But at some point, for all of our mental health and ability to continue to have good ideas and to be able to have the mental capacity and fortitude to pursue those ideas, we have to have a way to recharge. And part of me thinks that has to do with disrupting that expectation of ourselves that we're always on, right? We need to give ourselves the opportunity to not be on, to be disconnected, to do something different. For me, it's reading, right? I'm going to I'm going to go get an adult beverage, and I'm going to go sit and read my book, and I am going to yell at my phone if it buzzes at me, right? Or I'm going to turn it off, or I'm going to leave it in the other room, because I'm an alcohol lawyer. There is literally nothing that can't wait till tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And lawyers are particularly some of the worst with this, about constantly being on call and, working. Okay, it's not 18 hours straight, but I'm literally on for 18 hours because the client's going to text me at this time, or, this email comes in because I've got a client in California. So that's the thing I think philosophically and personally for me that I struggle with, that I think is really, really important, just to be able to be a good person.
Yeah, I agree with that. I am going to take your advice actually and go grab a Blue Moon and read my latest library pick, which is book 1 in the Bosch series. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Nice. All right.
Yeah, and thank you for chatting with me today, John. And where can people reach you if they have questions for you or would like to hang out with you on Twitter?
Yeah. So on all the socials, we're at Beer Law Center. And the website is www.beerlawcenter.com. I guess I don't have to say the www anymore. I grew up in pre-internet. So beerlawcenter.com and at Beer Law Center on the socials. Happy to chat with anybody. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today, Kim and Marie. This has been a blast.
Thank you so much, John. Have a great day.